Morning, all. All right, so news of the day video to start off your Monday, September the 25th. We are very close to October, and it feels like October out there right now. So Luff got hurt yesterday during an intra-squad scrimmage for the Detroit Red Wings. It's an upper body injury. Looked like it was his arm or his shoulder, so hopefully he's not out for very long. I like Luff. He's a depth player, and he's had injuries here and there, so hopefully he's not going to miss too much time this time around. Trevor Van Riemsdyk left the game last night against the Buffalo Sabres. The injury's undisclosed, so we don't know how long he may be out. The Caps also making news this morning. We're going to get into a lot of cuts from here going forward. As an example, the Caps sending 4 to juniors and 8 down to Hershey. Because remember, the AHL training camps are starting up, so you're going to want to send your guys down who you know are going to be in the AHL anyways. And you start off with the guys who don't need waivers. You can just send them straight down. Speaking of injury news for Tampa Bay Lightning fans, it doesn't sound like this is anything major. Vasilevskiy missing the start of camp. They're saying it's minor injuries and the Bolts just don't want to rush him. And agreed. There is no reason to rush Andrei Vasilevskiy. For Tampa Bay this year, it is key that he stays healthy. So we'll see if Vasilevskiy plays, 60, 65 games this year? Yeah, you want to make sure he's healthy. So if he doesn't take part in training camp and it leaves him healthier later in the season, that's fine too. Travis Konechny missed the team scrimmage for undisclosed reasons, so not sure why. Haven't seen why as of yet, which means there's probably nothing to necessarily worry about. Good news is Sean Couturier is in the lineup tonight for the Philadelphia Flyers, so it'll be nice to see him back in a Flyers jersey and playing games. Again, with Atkinson and Couturier back, that could make a big difference for the goal scoring side of things for Philadelphia. But Couturier is also pretty good defensively, so it is a boost to the Flyers. I don't expect that to make them a playoff team, but they may very well be better than expected if both Atkinson and Couturier can get back to the form they had a few years ago. Brandon Sutter impressed in his first game last night. It's now seen that it's probably a roster spot there for him, and it's his spot to lose, but he is, of course, on a tryout. So he has to basically convince Ken Holland to sign him and then send somebody else to the minors who is also on a contract. So you're trying to prove that you should be there instead of somebody else who was already expected to be there. So all the best to Sutter. Again, I liked him in Vancouver. I thought that when Benning traded for him, I thought that he probably put a little too much pressure on him, and then he signed him for too much money. I think he envisioned Sutter as being a second-line center. That was the discussion at the time, and I didn't see it. But Sutter, further down the lineup, doesn't hurt you. And obviously, if the Oilers sign him, it'll likely be for a league minimum. So all the best to Sutter. So last night's game with the Canucks. So I was faced with a bit of a dilemma. Once that game reached a 4-0 score, I'm like, okay, this game is ugly. I could probably stop watching the game and just review what I've watched so far and say, look, this game's done. But I thought, no, I'll watch the whole 60 minutes and I'll have fun with it. And I honestly, I thought, no, you have to. When a game's that lopsided, you kind of have to have fun with the video you're making about that game. So one thing with the Canucks to keep in mind is they have struggled early in the season. They have also struggled in recent preseasons. They went 2-3-2 last year in the preseason. They went 0-3-2 to start before they won their final 2 games going to the regular season. And they were 2-5 the previous preseason. My issue with the Canucks has been a simple one, and I will come back to it. Because I do think that while the preseason games don't matter, I think there's some other aspects of this that should at least be talked about. So I will come back to that. Now, Florida announcing today there's been a lot of upgrades to the arena. So, of course, they got the new naming rights put through and upgrades to most of the arena. It would almost fill the board, all the stuff they've added. They've changed the lighting. They've changed the audio. They've changed everything. And, of course, Florida coming off of a season where their attendance was greatly increased. So this is the perfect time to be putting in a bunch of arena upgrades. Now you've got fans coming in. You've got people interested. Now you upgrade the experience and make it so that when casual fans come in or you've got new fans in the building, they're like, hey, this building's great. This is a lot of fun. Can't wait to come back. So that's great for Florida and anxious to see how they do this year. So Toronto news. Sheldon Keefe likes the chemistry between Nylander and Domi. Now, of course, there's been discussions about Nylander being down the middle, right? And if he and Domi are paired together, do they end up on the third line? And honestly, for Toronto, if they have 3 scoring lines, obviously that would be great. The one thing, though, for Nylander is if he's centering that third line, does that cut back his overall ice time? Do we see his points totals drop down? And then could that affect his next contract? So that's one thing to keep an eye on, because obviously if Nylander's getting third line minutes and playing well, but if through the first 20 games he's got, say, 13 points, then, you know, the $10 million a year would look a lot less likely, at least in Toronto, right? So we'll see how that goes, but I agree with what Toronto's trying to do here to have 3 scoring lines. That is ideal. That's what you want. For all of the complaints about the core 4 in Toronto, really it is the depth scoring that has let them down. They really need to have it so that when another team shuts down the top guys, there's other players that can hurt that team, and that hasn't been the case with Toronto. So adding depth and getting Domi, Bertuzzi, and getting these guys all acclimated and getting that offense going, 3 lines deep is key for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the preseason. So coming back to my discussion about the Vancouver Canucks, there's a discussion to be had, I think, about the rule of how many veterans play in preseason games. And I say this because if you're paying to watch a game, so last night, if you're a Flames fan, you love that game. You love that game. If that game had been in Vancouver, Canuck fans would not have been happy. Now, if that game was in Vancouver, would they have dressed more veteran NHL experienced players? Maybe. But my issue with it is that when you see a lineup at the start of the game and they say, well, you know, it meets the criteria of, I think it's 8 veterans you can have in the lineup, but some of them are guys who haven't played in the NHL in a while, and they're depth players, they're not great. Like, I don't know, and again, I understand that they don't want to see veterans get hurt during the preseason, but the other aspect of that, and I think that's something that the Canucks have had a problem with the last couple seasons with their starts, is when you don't play your veterans very much during the preseason, and when you don't have your lineup together during the preseason very much, you don't get that chemistry. You don't have that chemistry. So when that first game of the regular season rolls around, the guys are still learning how to work together, and you might be playing against a team that had the veterans together more often. And so there you go. And I think it's especially important when you've got new players and you've got new line mates working together. They can work together in practice all they want. It's not a game situation. So I do think that there's an issue in the NHL when it comes to, and I'm saying this as a hockey fan as well, like we were going to get tickets to the game in Abbotsford, but I looked at the prices and I'm like, you know, and honestly, for an extra $10 over what the cheapest ticket is in Abbotsford, I could get a cheapest ticket in Vancouver for a regular season game. So that was an issue that I had with that game too, because I thought, you know, there's no guarantee that it's even going to be the NHL veterans. Like the game in Abbotsford should be, but I don't know if it necessarily will be. And then it ends up costing, once you get into food, once you get into parking, it ends up being about $500 for me to take the whole family for a preseason game. So I do think that if the NHL is going to look at costs like that, where, you know, if you're taking your family to a preseason, an exhibition game, I think that some of these rosters are just brutal, because what you're watching then is essentially an NHL squad versus an AHL squad, and we know how that turns out. So on the one hand, I think teams should probably make sure that their veterans get into more action in the preseason. And I've had that argument too going into the playoffs when guys are getting rested, especially if it's 3 or 4 games going into the playoffs. Like, okay, I understand the rest, and I understand they're banged up and everything, but you have that chemistry, you have, you know, that momentum, and it kind of feels like at times teams that rest those players down the stretch lose some of that momentum, some of that mojo, and it's hard to turn that back on come playoff time. And of course, we know if you get off to a slow start in the regular season, you're probably going to miss the playoffs. It's very rare that a team has a really rough first 10 games of the season and then makes the playoffs. So we'll see what happens. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Should the NHL make any changes to the lineups for the preseason, the guidelines they give, or is that just fine? And should exhibition games be treated just like that? They're exhibition games. They don't matter. It doesn't matter You just make sure everybody's healthy for opening night. I really do think there's something about creating some chemistry during the preseason and having that roll over to the regular season. One example would be last year, New Jersey had a great preseason, and then it just kept going into the regular season. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.